Back to Canadian news, where Alberta's 7-month pause on approving wind and solar energy projects ends tomorrow. But today, the provincial government replaced it with strict new rules for their development.
We need to ensure that we're not sacrificing our future agricultural yields or tourism dollars or breathtaking viewscapes to rush renewables developments through. And having clear rules means that everyone knows we will prioritize our agricultural lands.
Under these new guidelines, Alberta will no longer allow renewable generation developments on two types of agricultural land unless one can show both crops and livestock can coexist with the project. And no wind projects will be allowed on newly created buffer zones, which will be 35 kilometers around protected areas and other pristine viewscapes. Based on these new rules, one estimate says more than 60% of the province could fall into those buffer zones. So to find out more about what these new rules mean for renewable energy in Alberta, I'm joined by Nathan Neudorf, Alberta's Minister of Affordability and Utilities. Minister, thanks for joining us. Good to meet you.
Great to be here, David. I really appreciate you taking time.
I'd like to start with the buffer zones in this policy. 35-kilometer buffers around protected areas and provincial parks. I've seen some maps that have been developed about this, and this is 63% of all of Alberta that will be excluded from renewable developments. Where are you going to build these things if you exclude that much land?
Yeah, that's somebody else's interpretation, not the government's direction. We're looking at viewscapes along our foothills and mountains as the primary areas of impact, where visual scapes, including that vertical infrastructure, really comes into play. That's what we're trying to protect, is what people are looking at, the white caps on the Rocky Mountains and our waterfalls and those kind of viewscapes. That's what we're really trying to look at and address. It would be like putting a CN tower in your backyard. That's what we're seeking to address right here.
So are you talking just about these buffer zones being in the western part of the province, along the Rocky Mountains as you get towards, the border with British Columbia, or is this all provincial parks and all protected areas? Because, you apply it that second way and it's the overwhelming proportion of your territory that's excluded.
Yeah, no, this is going to be ongoing work as determined by the government, including and particularly ministries like environment protected areas, tourism, and perhaps even in forestry and parks, to make sure that we really define well. There is no universal definition of pristine landscapes. We're going to apply that judiciously. We want to leave a vast swath of southern Alberta available to renewable generation.
Okay, so how do you settle on a definition for that? Because the buffer zone, as it's being interpreted, is fairly objective, though you say it shouldn't be seen that way. There is the agricultural limitations on pristine farmland. You don't want windmills and things going there, though this is something advocates have said is a good place for renewable developments to go. How do you define what a view plane is? Because that's a very subjective criteria, and subjectivity can get in the way of certainty, which is what investors like.
Yeah, absolutely. We are continuing to define that, but again, our primary starting point is our foothills and mountains. That is the viewscapes that we see here in Alberta on the flat prairies. While other individual sites might be important, that's not necessarily going to be defined that way, and that's why we've sought to protect agricultural land. And I think we'll continue to work with industry, creating that certainty in investment, and that's what the AUC is meant to do, is provide their rulings on these applications on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, but you put this pause in place to sort of develop a plan that would give certainty, and here we still don't have it. And I don't say that to be, provocative, but you have a bunch of things you still need to sort out. So where does this leave the industry if these key things about what is actually a buffer and what is actually a viewscape aren't clearly defined, and now you're going to lift the moratorium very quickly?
Well, we will clearly define all of that, and this is work that we ongoing with the AUC. They've always made these judgments, and that's why we have them as a regulator. So we're going to move forward. Other jurisdictions around the world, the UK, BC, jurisdictions in the US, have used viewscapes and the kilometers 20 to 35 in responsible ways. This is responsible government, making sure that we're protecting our tourism industry, our agricultural industry, and many other industries. We will set these definitions in very short order for clarity and investor confidence moving forward.
If you do the viewscape restrictions too harshly, if you use the buffer zones too liberally, you're going to move these developments away from the population centers in southern Alberta, and that's just going to drive up the transmission costs and make development less feasible. So how do you strike that balance? I mean, you're a province that says you're committed to net zero by 2050. How do you do that when people's first reaction to these restrictions is that they're pretty severe for the renewable sector?
In fact, I would disagree. I don't feel these are severe at all. These are very responsible and balanced. We've already had that feedback from numerous jurisdictions, municipalities, and including stakeholders. We will continue to work with them. Our transmission policy is continuing work. We expect that those announcements to come out in the months ahead. And where renewable generation has already taken place, these lines are already existing. So this will become about efficiency and optimizing what we already have instead of adding further new costs. And we're doing that work.
So these buffer zones and the view restrictions, will you apply that to non-renewable developments? I've been reading about Grassy Mountain, which is a coal mine that's up for consideration on the foothills of the Rocky Mountain. Coal mining is not pretty. I mean, would these sorts of restrictions apply to that and the extra natural gas fields that Premier Smith says she wants to bring online for your energy mix?
Depending on who the regulator are, they would be open to apply it. We have instructed the AEC, which is our regulator, that any project within that 35 kilometers could be subject to a visual impact assessment. And we think that's a responsible way to go. We think that other regulators may also look at that and continue that work in other areas.
Okay, so this would apply if the regulator chooses, when they get an application, it would apply to a new coal mine, to a new natural gas proposal or a new oil sands proposal should it fit into any of these areas. Am I correct in understanding that?
It would be dependent on the regulator and their decision. And like I said, the language is that it could trigger a visual impact assessment. A lot of natural landscapes, if you're on a ridge, obviously that's far more visible than if you're in a valley or behind a bluff. And that's why we've added, in terms of our regulator, the AEC, a requirement to do site visits on a much more regular and stringent basis to actually grasp the physical realities of the landscape where these projects are sited.
So when you look at the initial response to this, when you look at that map that says 63% of Alberta in total, 76% of Alberta will be off limits with the plain reading of these regulations, you say not to believe that. But what is your assessment of how much land and how much of Alberta will be excluded from this sort of development under the regulations you're proposing? Have you done that kind of an analysis of what you envision in terms of how much space won't be able to be developed?
I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertips, but again, we are predominantly looking at our foothills and mountains as the pristine viewscapes that we want to protect. And there is no bound. We want to make sure that we can have renewable energy working with agricultural lands, and we are trying to accommodate both in a responsible way.
This was during the pause, the moratorium on new renewable projects. You had the Alberta Utilities Commission do an assessment of this, and it's called Module A, I believe, that was given to you and informed your decision making here. Will you make that report from the AUC public so people can assess these regulations against the findings and the recommendations of the regulator?
Yes, we will be making that report public. Likely after the second portion, Module B, comes to us. I think we're targeting within the next few months to be able to incorporate all that, but we will be making all of these reports public.
But if this is the document that guides this policy, wouldn't it make more sense to have it out now so that stakeholders and interested parties can assess what the regulator has said and what it wanted, and as you try to fine-tune the various policies you've put out here?
Well, we wanted to work in conjunction with Module B, which also has complementary parts and pieces, so we can make sure we align that, and we think it makes the most sense to release it as a complete package.
Okay, so when this is all said and done, Minister, just as a final point, what percentage of the energy mix in Alberta do you hope to get from the renewable sector?
Well, right now we're very close to 25-30%, and we think with all the applications continuing to arrive before the AUC, that we will see that number actually increase. And we're looking forward to them being a balanced part of our mix and our generation for decades to come.
Okay, so and just when will we know exactly how much territory how this, to reconcile the concerns spelled out in this map versus the reassurances you're giving me now. When will Albertans and when will the renewable energy sector have the sort of clarity that they're looking for and know exactly what areas they can explore for renewable energy developments, wind farms, solar, whatever it may be? When are they going to know exactly how this will work?
For sure by the end of this year. In fact, the projects are before the AUC right now. They will have a lot of that certainty worked out in the days ahead as the AUC responds to their projects in particular. Many of them won't be impacted. And if they are, they will be addressed in an expeditious way.
Nathan Neudorf, Alberta's Minister of Affordability and Utilities. Thanks for your time today.
Great to be here. Thanks so much, David.